Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe that films are never neutral. There's a political as well as artistic message captured, either on purpose or accidentally, in every film, and we are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. On this episode, we are doing class war 80s horror, and specifically a double feature with John Carpenter's They Live from 1988 and Brian Yuzna's Society from 1989.
Is this a uniquely 80s genre, Isaac?
I don't think it's a particularly uniquely 80s genre. I'm trying to think of other class war horror movies, and I'm sure people could come up with a whole bunch of others. But I think the reason to pair these two movies is that both of them are really, I think, are reactions to the Reagan era. So this is, the birth of neoliberalism, not the birth of neoliberalism, it existed before, but like the full coming out of neoliberalism.
Is it the height of it, maybe, or not quite?
Well, I think really it's coming out, and it's the full blow of sort of neoliberalism. So
yeah,
at an ideological level, the sort of greed is good, supply side economics, neo 50s, all the different elements sort of come together under Reagan.
Yeah.
And then, this is sort of relevant for They Live especially. You have a massive recession induced by the Federal Reserve to break, basically by raising interest rates to like 20% under Paul Volcker in the early 80s, which is designed to do basically to do a couple things, but it's designed to crush 70s inflation, right? But what's underneath that, of course, is to help break the labor movement. And then you also have Reagan taking the gloves off and firing the air traffic controllers. So part of it is it's an era of both sort of like effervescence on Wall Street, but it's actually one punctuated by like major recessions. So it's sort of the watershed decade there.
Yeah.
The 70s are sort of a period of crisis. You can see that in film, and the 80s are the effort to resolve that crisis politically.
And it's interesting how the different genres in the 80s also kind of react to what's going on culturally and politically. Because I was just, as you mentioned that, you kind of had a vague little reference there to Wall Street, the Oliver Stone movie, which is 87, I believe. And the two films we're looking at are 88, 89. But then I immediately went to all of the celebrations of like Wall Street, I guess, culture, sort of. Like that branch off from Wall Street where there's just like the I don't know, like the yuppification of like celebrating the yuppie and stockbrokers and investment and this whole like fetishization in movies of Wall Street characters. I don't know, like I just picture Michael J. Fox for some reason, like Secret of My Success or those types of movies. In different genres, they deal with it differently. Like it's more celebratory if you look at dramas or comedies, whereas if you go into the horror genre that we're looking at today, it's a bit I would say it's a bit more palatable to me because it's more of a gloves off critique that I guess politically agree with more so than, I know the whole story is Wall Street's supposed to have been, kind of a satire kind of look. Like the Greed is Good speech wasn't supposed to be a rallying cry for stockbrokers. It was supposed to have been an indictment, the way Oliver Stone tells it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true considering Oliver Stone's politics. I mean,
for sure.
Like Ghostbusters, for instance, which is basically an anti-regulatory movie.
Oh, yeah.
Good point. I think you find a lot of reactionary stuff in the comedies of the era.
Mm-hmm.
When did Scrooged come out?
It's late 80s, right? So it's in the mix.
And I think that's one where, they're taking...
Yeah.
Well, part of what they're doing is they're taking a 19th century story for the effervescence of sort of like 19th century British capitalism and critiquing part of the ethic of that and then applying it to the 80s, which totally makes sense. So that's more of a critique. But I think horror is set up to do this stuff more.
Right. Right.
And we talked about this when we talked about horror movies in terms of Suburbia, right? And that's an 80s reaction to sort of the neo 50s ish stuff.
Right.
Element. But I think these two movies are interesting because they're explicitly class war movies, and what they're about the hiddenness of the way that the wealthy exploit and consume the poor, right? Like they're about, in both of these movies, and we're going to get into the dangers of this approach, particularly, there is an underlying conspiracy in which the actual ruling class, which is the wealthy, like it's not like a secret cabal, it's just the wealthy,
Mhm.
are not like us.
Right. Which is interesting because it's this isn't something that we're like unearthing that's hidden within the plot or some of our more like what is the political the political universe that Gremlins is operating in. When we did our Christmas special one, like it's there, but you kind of have to dig into it a little bit to really find it because it's a fun creature movie set at the holidays. These are like it's just right there in the script,
Right.
but they get to have fun with it because you're operating in the horror genre, so it's a bit more. You get to have a bit more. Well, in the case of Society, you get to have a whole bunch of really fun special effects and practical effects to really highlight the political point you're making. So yeah, there's not a lot of. There is some below the surface stuff, but like the surface level stuff in both of these films is directly political.
The other movie that we've dealt with that's sort of an '80s reaction movie is obviously RoboCop.
Right.
Which deals with sort of once again. I think the last time we really dealt with the birth of neoliberalism or sort of the emergence of neoliberalism as not just as a mode of organizing politics, but as a mode of molding our souls. I'm sort of borrowing from David Harvey there, from the Marxist geographer David Harvey, but like as a way of organizing how we think about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you see it in the movies, and you see it expressed through the movies.
Right.
And yeah, RoboCop is definitely a counter to that as well. But yeah, these go at it from a different angle.
Well, Isaac, it's a little probably out of order chronologically, but the way that we watched these was we watched Society first, and then we watched They Live. So let's go with the way we viewed them rather than the way that they came out in theaters. So we will start off this conversation with Society from 1989. This is Brian Yuzna's, I don't know, opus, I guess we could call it, right?
Yeah, I think it is.
I think it is too. I know he's pretty well known going into Society as working with Stuart Gordon with Reanimator and a few other films as producer and I think writer. I get confused because he wrote the screenplay for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which now having seen Society, I'm thinking, what was his original draft? Was it more like rated R horror for that movie? And they just made it family friendly? Because that's like the one thing on his filmography. Like a couple of Silent Night, Deadly Night movies, Necronomicon, Book of the Dead. Like he's not operating in PG Disney territory. So I find that kind of interesting that's part of his filmography.
It's interesting that you bring that up because Stuart Gordon, he did all these, he did all of these Lovecraft adaptions, right? I mean, that's what Reanimator is.
Yeah.
And there is a Lovecraftian flavor to this film, I actually think. In terms of in terms of sort of the unknown and the ancient, the sort of always with us nature of the
right.
threat. It's a much more progressive vision than anything Lovecraft would ever have come up with.
So I guess it's still worth mentioning as we're diving into films here, we are talking about the whole film. So if you haven't seen the movie, if you want the unspoiled watch of the movie and you haven't seen this, stop listening now or keep listening because you don't care about spoilers. But we're going to be talking about everything that we can or feel like talking about within these films, which will spoil some of the fun if you haven't seen Society or They Live. It will be spoiled for you.
Yeah. So
that said,
watch this first. It's easily available.
Yeah. The IMDb synopsis of Society, for those who haven't seen it, says an ordinary teenage boy discovers his family is part of a gruesome orgy cult for the social elite, which is accurate. Not a ton of extra details there.
For Bill Whitney,
I've never been paranoid.
Fear plays a large part in family life.
I feel like something's gonna happen. And if I scratch the surface, there'll be something terrible underneath.
He's afraid his sister...
Could you zip me up, Billy?
...is not what she seems.
God, Bill, what's the matter with you?
He thinks his friends are out to get him.
You make waves, Whitney, you're gonna drown.
People are what they are. Now you have to learn to accept that.
He's about to find out the truth.
Why are you guys doing this to me, huh?
What, you've been living with these people all your life and you didn't know anything about this?
Is far worse than he could ever imagine.
If you don't follow the rules, Billy,
bad things happen.
Didn't you know, Billy Boy? The rich have always sucked off low-class scum like you.
Uh-oh, Billy. Clarissa? Don't be so intense. Now, some people make the rules, and some people follow the rules. It's a question of what you're born to.
You never were one of us.
You know, you really deserve what's going to happen to you. I don't think so. Wait.
Can't you see they're setting you up for something?
You know how I hate to give you drugs. You're officially dead.
Don't go home, Billy.
No.
Bill Whitney is about to become one
Showtime, Billy!
with society.
Who are you?
Let me give you a hand, Bill.
In Beverly Hills, what you fear is only the beginning.
Anything for society.
But it is. It's a coming of age sort of story, because this is a high school kid who just doesn't feel like he fits in, which is weird because it's all set in Beverly Hills. Because like this is just an athletic white boy, heterosexual white boy at his high school, like not fitting in. We were like, this kid seems like he fits in just fine in 80s Reagan America here. But he's going to a counselor, a shrink of some sort, and doesn't seem like he quite fits in, even within his own family unit of mom, dad, and sister, until his sister's ex-boyfriend plays him a cassette tape because he has been obsessively spying in a very, pervy kind of way, stalker way. But through those actions, he reveals that like, oh, something is up, something is going on here. And I think one of the reasons you wanted to tie this with They Live, Isaac, would be that the way the sunglasses work in They Live, the audio tape works in society. When he plays the audio tape for his shrink, it's just a totally normal conversation. But when he listens to it, he hears the sound effects of this gruesome, orgy cult.
So one of the things, I mean, you brought up while we were watching it, because you hadn't seen it before, is that it's really perfectly structured. Like,
yeah,
the mystery as he unravels it, as he feels sort of isolated from his family and this sort of weird, wealthy Beverly Hills environment that he's in, right? From this sort of, the secluded place of privilege is really well done. And, what you're thinking, I mean, this is a movie with huge amounts of like incest overtones, right? It's, right, a lot. And in fact, implicit and explicit. There's, so you could see this as, a coming of age story and dealing with sexuality and like the most awkward parts of it.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, I meant coming of age in that this is a teenage character who's like, where do I fit in? What's really going on? I mean, it's not your traditional like coming of age, but it's at that age. He's at that age of a character where he's trying to figure out who he is, how he fits into society, that sort of thing.
Right. Well, and so that's the thing, is they keep mentioning society, right? Mm-hmm. Which is actually, spoilers, the reality that our ruling class, our actual ruling class, is some sort of alternate species, shape-shifting alternate species that likes to absorb, basically have orgies in which they meld with each other while slowly absorbing us, the humans. And that, I guess part of what I'm getting at is that there is, within the themes, right, along with sort of your class conflict theme and your alienation from society theme, is like a sexual, like a theme of sort of sexual awakening and the most awkward elements of that. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, I think it's interesting you point out that, like, on the face of it, this is not a character who should be alienated from any of these things.
Right.
And so what's going on here? Like, why does this work? What is their argument here?
Well, because the structure of it was interesting to me, because, again, I was the one who hadn't seen this before watching this. And I knew, just from the a picture, like the artwork that's on Canopy, which we watched it, is not the poster for the movie. It's this weird kind of like flesh blob with like a human eyes and nose. And it's like, what the hell is going on with this movie? And I knew it was within the horror genre, even down to the credit. I think when we started watching it of, I didn't quite write it down, but the credits like surrealistic practical special effects created by Screaming Mad George. And I was like, well, that's a credit. That's amazing. And you'll go through an hour of this movie and be like, yeah, where's the rated R horror stuff? Because it spends time developing, I think, in a very comical, like, what the fuck kind of way, this kid's Billy, like his life and the slow creep of like him realizing what's really going on here. You don't get, if you're a blood and guts horror fan, fine, but you don't get that in the first hour of this movie.
Right.
Which is interesting because, but this time you're talking about the late 80s. You've gone through like the whole slasher subgenre, this is not a slasher movie, but there's a whole pretty much like start to finish gore elements to a lot of 80s horror. And they save it pretty much all for the finale here.
I mean, it at an incredible level. I mean,
oh yeah.
I think, okay. I just want to jump at this theme of like, why is he alienated, and what is the argument about our class structure that's being made in this movie? What is the purpose of having it be hidden from us, that we don't actually see it, that it's in plain sight and yet it's not, and that even someone who seems like they fit in doesn't? He's literally cattle for them, right? He is fodder for their orgy, and he will be absorbed and killed at the end. He has been raised. He is actually, part of what it is that he's actually a pet.
Right. But not overtly treated as such. Like they're, proud of you, attaboy, like.
Well, I actually think they do treat him like a pet.
Oh no, I meant like there's like 70s horror movies where like, people are kept in cages as pets and things like that. It's not that movie.
Right. It's not that movie, but I actually think that, yeah, like in a sense, the feeling of alienation where his parents aren't his parents is because literally, yes, they're like going through the motions of treating him like one of their own, in the sense of like almost like he is a pet, but like a pet that you keep in the home because you're going to slaughter them by absorbing them in a semi-sexual way. But like, I think, part of it is like, what is the purpose of all this? Is that, is like ultimately you have a class structure which ideologically is hidden from us by and large, right? That we don't see, but in reality, the rich have, literally in the words of the movie, sucked off on the poor, right? On those who do not belong. And despite our ideology that this is permeable and anybody can be part of it, in fact, that is not the case. That there is a limited, that this is an elite intercircle, and, for every, to them, everyone else is not even really human. And, that's, I think, a pretty powerful argument.
Yeah. This film is really interesting to me because, like, so going into this, not having seen it, like as I already mentioned, probably too many times, I knew it was a late 80s horror movie. I've heard people reference it as a body horror movie. And I find that the structure to the screenplay and the final film is really fascinating because, like, the tape is a good example. Like the tape I already mentioned, that his friend, the ex-boyfriend of his sister, that he records and he plays for Billy. Like, you hear what sounds like an alien orgy at a coming out debutante party. And it's comical. Like the acting on this tape that he plays for him is clear. Like, it just seemed to me like the acting isn't, I don't think, stellar in this movie. It's serviceable and it's fine. But then when you hear the recording of it, you're like, this sounds like a joke tape. Or that's the way I was interpreting it. Anyway, but it builds up to the audience like, wait, is this what we're going to end up seeing? Because also, like, knowing it's a horror movie and you're not seeing like horrific stuff, except for like a contorted body, like through a frosted glass in the shower at one point. There's nothing really body horror, until you get to this finale. But there's also expectations, and I'm watching a horror movie. I've heard from other people that have seen it like, oh, wow, no, it's a body horror movie. So, and I think I'd heard the term shunting actually ahead of time, but like, that's a nonsense word. I don't know what the hell that means. So the film, I think, does a masterful job of building up like your expectations. And then I think as we were watching it together, I even told you, I was like, this better really deliver, because it's building up a lot of stuff that I'm not sure it can, it can actually, what's that? It's writing checks. I don't know if it's going to be able to cash by the end of the story. And then we get to the final, orgy shunting scene, and it more than delivers.
Right.
Which is interesting because it was building up some serious expectations. Like I said, even the credit at the beginning where like, surreal effects provided by screaming Mad George was like, okay, well, what's it going to give us? And it does. As a first time viewer, I was just like, jaw on the floor. Oh my God, I can't believe they went there.
It really does. It's really, it's a lot.
Which is fascinating to me because everything around it, like it's a really well marketed, perfectly built up body horror movie. Even on the poster, the tagline is "The rich have always fed off the poor. ... This time it's for real." And I don't know what I mean. And honestly, too, I don't know what I was expecting. I think because it has the audio tape and the hinting of like this coming out party and like this like orgy body horror scene that's coming up. All the hints are there that I should have been able to visualize this, but I could not have visualized this ahead of time.
It would be very hard. I mean, I think this is honestly one of the major, like, I think, the 80s are sort of, in a sense, before, the 90s is a transition into CGI. And, I mean, yes, there's a little CGI in the 80s.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
But I think this is, in some ways, one of the great triumphs, along with The Thing, along with, like, I don't know, the Blob remake of, like, like physical effects. I mean, there's a lot of them in the 80s,
absolutely.
but this is like one of those, whoa, I really, it's, and I think we'll come back to the themes a little bit more as we sort of, after we talk a little more about They Live. But it's like, it's one of those, this is the thing, it just goes down so easy, and yet it's so well done and gross.
Yeah.
So They Live is John Carpenter, oftentimes considered one of John Carpenter's greatest movies.
Mm-hmm.
John Carpenter is sort of one of our great horror tours. Have we covered a John Carpenter movie up until now? I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember, actually. I think we mentioned him when we were talking about art house horror back in October, but
yeah, I don't think we actually
I don't think we've done a specific John Carpenter episode or movie just yet.
We're going to look back and find something really embarrassing.
Yeah.
But the synopsis is: they influence our decisions without us knowing it. They numb our senses without us feeling it. They control our lives without us realizing it. They live. Nada, a down-on-his-luck construction worker, discovers a pair of special sunglasses. Wearing them, he is able to see the world as it really is. People being bombarded by media and government with messages to stay asleep. No imagination, submit to authority. Even scarier is that he is able to see some unusually normal-looking people are in fact ugly aliens in charge of a massive campaign to keep humans subdued.
Our masters!
What do these things want, and why are they here?
You still don't get it, do you, boy?
They have recruited the rich and the powerful.
They're running the whole show.
Wake up! They're all about you, all around you. Blinded us to the truth.
Take a look.
They are safe as long as they are not discovered.
I don't know what they are or where they came from, but we gotta stop them.
Stay away from me.
Put these on.
They have us. Look at them, they're everywhere. Our owners.
We have no other choice.
I don't like this one bit.
Leave it alone, man. It ain't none of my business, ain't none of yours.
We have been lulled into a trance.
Listen to what I'm saying to you. We're in trouble. The whole world's in trouble.
Control us.
You're sending some kind of signals out of TV sets.
I've got one that can see.
Mama don't like tattletale.
Now we start spilling some blood.
Let's go.
Push a button.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
If you didn't catch the spoiler alert for Society, that definitely applies to They Live as well.
Yeah, it's the whole thing.
So, Aaron, how did you first see this movie?
When I was in film school, I got endless shit for a few gaps in my film watching knowledge. Mainly it was for Star Wars because I hadn't seen all of the Star Wars original trilogy at that point, and so I got a bunch of shit for that. The other one was taking a John Carpenter class as an authorship class. We were watching a bunch of his films, and I had mentioned that I had never seen They Live. So with several other film majors, one weekend before we would have gotten to They Live in the class itself, we just got super baked and watched They Live. So like, you got to see it right now. So, it was a weekend, we're hanging out and we're partying. So we're watching They Live, and I guess at that point, it wouldn't have been a blackout because I wasn't drinking. It was a green out. And like, I remember watching the movie and going like, wow, that's, pretty awesome. But, didn't really stay in my memory that well. Cause then also right after that, we watched like we was it a Fulci movie or no, it was a Argento movie that I was like, oh, you've never seen such and such either. And I was like, what the hell is this? Pick on Aaron weekend? Like, and then, we watched a bunch of really great films, but it wasn't, it's a little cloudy. It wasn't really right there at the front and center of my brain. So watching it this time, I remembered basically like there were sunglasses, there were billboards, there were like skeleton people walking around pretending to be us. And front and center, though, there's this amazing like 15-minute knockdown, drag out fight between the man, Keith David, and Roddy Piper. So I remembered a few key parts of it, but really not that much at all about this movie.
Yeah, which, that's what people think of, and they think about, I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
That line still bugs me.
I love that line so much. It's so good.
It's such an 80s one-liner, but it just, show him chewing some bubblegum earlier. Or he's also in a bank. Make the pun about a bank. I'm like, oh, I'm here to withdraw all my funds and kick ass. Oh, wait, I'm broke and homeless. Time to just kick ass, or something else.
But that's, I think the point is that it doesn't make any sense. It's just,
yes, I know. Carpenter's one-liners rarely make that much sense to me.
But
they're delivered with pizzazz and with charm, and they work in the movie.
One thing that should be, this is a role that would have gone to Kurt Russell normally, because like when you watch a Carpenter movie from this era, he has his stock crew, which is one of the things I love about Carpenter, is that it's like, over and over again, a lot of the same people, includes Keith David. And Kurt Russell is sort of his leading man.
It's sort of the missing piece. This one, as soon as you mentioned that we were watching this, I was like, oh, this is clearly a Kurt Russell role.
Right. But I actually think Roddy Piper does a really good job.
Yeah.
He's not like an incredible actor, but he certainly gets it across. It's really funny having him as an everyman, because like he sort of looks like your sort of white working class construction worker guy, like stereotype, until he takes off his shirt, and then you realize it's like, yeah, normal
at work, by the way.
Yeah, at work while he's like digging things. You're sort of like, this is normal people don't have muscles like that. You don't actually get muscles like that from like physical labor.
Right. That's true.
I think this has both a similar approach to class politics in that you have the hidden sort of illusions of class, right? That the what the true nature of the ruling class isn't hidden, or is hidden from us. But it's also very, very different, because it comes from the angle of an incredibly downtrodden working class. And so part of it is there's never what you're trying to overcome here in the beginning of the movie when they're sort of talking and the characters are meeting with each other is the illusion that you're not getting fucked over. But it's actually really clear that everybody's getting fucked over, and it's like the illusion is in a sense paper thin. There's a similarity with sort of RoboCop in that you have a lot of absurd ads that but the ads are not so absurd that you don't believe they could be totally real. They're absurd when you're looking at the world that you're in. Because Roddy Piper is basically as you say, sort of a homeless construction worker looking for work. What's interesting is what he's doing. This is and the score indicates this with harmonica and synth. With the harmonica and synth is what we see at the beginning of this movie is functionally the Great Depression, right?
Right.
Like that is the riff that he's playing off of, and Roddy Piper ends up in like basically a homeless camp by like a church. Like it's all this sort of Great Depression motifs, and that's what you're comparing the 80s to, in a sense, right? The deep chasms between the haves and have not.
Well, and also in this particular story, compared to society, there's more haves. Like when he puts on the sunglasses, they're pretty much everywhere he's looking. Like any store he's in, bank, whatever, they're all around in a way that in society it seemed a bit more localized.
Well, I think they are. Part of it is that they, it's everyone who sort of maintains authority in society, which is a broader society. Yeah. Which is a broader strata of people have been.
Oh, that's true.
Are actually freebooting alien private sector, aliens, in which Earth is the global South, and they're here to use up our resources and then, leave us a husk.
Well, they're also trying to use global warming to make Earth more like their own planet. I think they talk about too.
Right.
But by extracting as many resources and polluting as best they can.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they even refer to the Earth is their third world or something like that. Is like a line in the movie.
Yeah, they openly say that.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about it is that, so you have this vision of class, you have the deep chasm between the haves and have-nots. You don't have the psychosexual elements. You have instead like extreme poverty versus sort of want, and then the ideology of consumption and consumption and consuming, and
Mm-hmm.
As sort of as your underlying as this sort of underlying motif of control, and that this is sort of an illusion that you have to break through to realize what's actually being done to you. But the
Right.
other thing that's different is in They Live, the ruling class is so arrogant they don't bother to co-opt you. You're literally their pet. Whereas in this, in society, that you're literally like their pet, and they don't even really bother to co-opt you. You're just
Right. Right. Right.
totally enmeshed in this thing. In this, there's increasing number of humans that are aware, and they're given uh, special privileges and wealth to be co-opted by it. So it shows a more permeable class structure in a sense. But
That's true.
what you give up is freedom and the ability to act, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So like you have the ability to join, which then allows you to have, good workers to like enforce the society that you've already created here.
Right. I actually almost think it's a bit of a weakness because it weakens the metaphor. Like there's a certain point where like they discover that one of the people from the homeless camp has been now raised up to being wealthy. And it's
Right.
like, I guess, but that sort of does break your metaphor a little bit. Why would they want this person exactly? Like the cops, I get, right?
Right. Enforcers.
Or other wealthy humans or whatever. The woman, spoilers, the potential romantic partner for Roddy Piper is actually a traitor as well. Surprise at the very end. And, she's human. She's but she's at the TV station. She's one of the purveyors of the signal that's controlling people.
Right. Right. Right.
I don't know. It's nonetheless, I think it works really well, but it is a different view of the illusory class structure.
Well, he even has it. There's a Carpenter quote I found where he was talking about this about They Live, and he said that it was, quote, "The picture's premise is that the Reagan Revolution is run by aliens from another galaxy," which at its heart, like that couldn't be more Carpenter. Like starts off something we were like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but like then he goes right, hard into aliens and sci-fi, and I was like, yeah, that's Carpenter. All right.
Yeah, exactly. It's super. I mean, the whole thing is actually super Carpenter. Is there any sort of Lovecraftian motif to this?
I don't know Lovecraft too well to comment on that, so I am not the person to ask that question to. So, okay, this is not Lovecraftian, but when I was looking for quotes about this, what John Carpenter thought about his own creation, within both movies, and I think I mentioned this to you before we were recording, we were talking about this, was I was wondering, since this is the whole like hidden elites within our society, I was like, you know what? I wonder if there's like any sort of QAnon followers, what their grasp on certain movies, like, like the way the Matrix has been completely co-opted as like, getting red pilled or black pilled,
Right.
It's been taken over by the lunatic fringe on the right. And I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. Do they realize who made the movie that they are all referencing? Because I don't think they'd be that welcoming to the Wachowskis. Anyway, so I was like, these two movies, They Live in Society, I was like, there's the whole like, they could do the whole like sex trafficking cabal that they think is going on with Comet Ping Pong Pizza and all that, the whole QAnon universe. I was like, this seems ripe for them to grab onto one of these two movies and totally miss the point.
Yes.
And they have. I found, this is just a very brief aside, but I thought this was interesting because there's some political text to this. Carpenter himself has had to go on record rejecting neo-Nazi white supremacist claims that They Live is an allegory for Jewish control of the world.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, interesting. He specifically countered that by saying, no, it's about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism. You're wrong.
Well, I think this is flowing into our comparison of the two movies, and this was a theme that I brought up while we were watching them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that he's had to do that is the danger. I think these are both great movies, but the danger of approaching these things in the form of an alien conspiracy is, so, anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. I can't remember who said that, but it's a quote. And in the sense that a lot of times, sort of historically, anti-capitalism has been played into anti-Semitic anti-Semitic conspiracies, right?
Right.
And funneled into the point of which is not anti-capitalism at all. It's all just it's all just the evil cabal of like a racial like sort of other. And you'll notice that in society, for instance, they actually make an effort to guard against this, because they make the sister's sort of ex-boyfriend,
Oh, the stalker.
the stalker is
Yeah.
is explicitly Jewish, so that you can have
Yeah.
the your sort of ruling class characters make sort of anti-Semitic comments. Why? Because they're not Jewish; they're wasps.
Yeah.
That's what you're really dealing with, is your old money wasps, and that's what the movie's about. But I think it's possible the filmmakers are aware that you have to do something to inoculate, because approaching this in this way, that is the way it's going to go.
Right.
I think, They walks into this stuff even more, because the sort of consumerism controlling, lizard people, all of this stuff is like can be played right into this.
Mm-hmm.
If you can easily take this out of the realm of metaphor. It's really not surprising, even though it's like, if you watch the movie, there's no sort of like clues to these people being, there's no Jewish aspect, stereotypical
No.
quote Jewish aspect to this. These are, they're fucking yuppies, right? Like,
right.
They act like yuppies. They talk like yuppies. Like, it's very clear what they are.
Yeah, all the branding is that way too. Yeah, you pointed out when we were watching Society, which I was like, that's interesting that they had, like, Brian Yuzna was then clearly like aware enough, like, okay, we need to put this into the story.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, hey, yeah, that's a good point. You did, and luckily he did too. That doesn't necessarily, like you said, that kind of inoculates a little bit from it, but people are still going to read stupid shit into things like that, if they want to.
Well,
so
QAnon people are good. Yeah, there's nothing you can do with that.
Right.
But I think it's as much as I like both of these movies, I think it's a weakness in this approach as a critique of capitalism and breaking through sort of the ideological barriers that sort of capitalism puts up, in which what we do as capitalism is seen as normalized. In capitalism is seen as normalized, right? And natural, even though it's socially constructed and something that can be changed.
Yeah. So we have to also do the obligatory quick shout out where they live, because we've got Raymond St. Jacques in the street preacher role, which is pretty essential to the plot here, who played BG in Uptight. See our 2-part podcast episode deep dive onto Uptight for how awesome he is as an actor, specifically in Uptight, but he's also solid here. He popped up, and obviously I didn't see it Uptight the first time I saw They Live, so it wasn't recognizable then, but the way you see him as a street preacher in this movie, you hear him speaking and kind of like beckons Rowdy Piper's character, Nada, over to him. And I was like, wait a minute, that sounds like BG. Because it's his speaking style.
Yeah. Maybe we should just track down every role he plays as a revolutionary. I wonder how many more there are.
He plays MLK actually in a movie in the 70s that I'm blanking on right now. But I looked up his filmography as like for his the characters he played over time. He's in, well, we don't need to go down this road. I was going to say he's in The Final Come Down as well, that I just watched not too long ago. But so the other overarching issue, and I don't know if there's a thread here that's worth discussing, but I at least wanted to bring it up between both of these movies, the whole idea of a ruling class who aren't like us, or not even not like us, like a ruling class that maybe aren't visible to the surface as everybody's going about their day-to-day lives or whatever, but all this evil, secretive shit's going on like just below the surface that nobody's really aware of. This is also the era of, in the 80s here, in not in the films, but in society, this is the era of the satanic panic going on. You've got in the mid-'80s, the McMartin preschool trials going on, where all kinds of just wild, bullshit, crazy accusations, pretty akin to like ping pong pizza and sex trafficking and adrenochrome, harvesting elites that tie into the whole QAnon nonsense. That was in the culture in the 80s in the satanic panic. And I'm wondering how much of that fed into creating these types of horror movies that are about the elites just below the surface doing these weird, probably more within society, because you actually see this weird like blob orgy of them transmorphing into organic blobs to consume us regular human folk.
Right.
I don't know how much is really there for that, but it was interesting to me when I realized, like, I was looking at like 80s and what's going on in the culture. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, the whole satanic panic going on. People worried about satanic symbols and people that were staying underground to, sacrificing children and all this other crazy shit they said was going on.
I feel like, obviously there isn't like the direct connection, but maybe it is a sort of in the air kind of
Right.
element to this. I mean, there's also you can take this stuff back to like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and sort of Cold War era,
Mhm.
or I mean, this is the Cold War. It's actually the second Cold War, but sort of the Cold War panic of the 50s, sort of they're infiltrating us kind of horror
Right. Oh,
movie.
yeah, that's true too.
And I think that's certainly a lot of what's going on, especially in They Live.
Mhm.
But I think, yeah, I mean, I think you've got sort of a a hiddenness, even though these are very different different than the sort of satanic thing. And of course, Carpenter does his own his own sort of angle on sort of Satan in Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
His own, well, his very Lovecraftian angle on Satan. I don't know. I think that's interesting, and I think it's one of these sort of in the air sort of things. I hadn't actually, just until we said it, I had thought about the connection to sort of like your Invasion of the Body Snatchers sort of situation. But it's interesting. Those are very, in a sense, reactionary movies, or sort of panicked anti-communist movies, and this is turning that model on capitalism itself
Yeah,
and on
yeah.
society itself. So
Yeah.
it's very much like post-Vietnam 80s mistrust sort of approach to those sorts of same methods.
Right, right. And some of the same institutions are targets of it as well, which is kind of interesting too.
Yeah. Hmm. So I guess I would ask, so how do you like these movies?
I mean, I like them. It's a genre, as I mentioned back on our art house horror series, like that I wasn't too familiar with 80s horror, so I've been rectifying that over sporadically over the last 6-8 months, however long it's been since October. And so I'm checking off a lot of stuff that I've meaning to watch. Society. I've been meaning to go back to They Live and rewatch that one again. I'm enjoying them, specifically though in our context for this particular show, because I think it enhances the viewing a little bit more than just like, oh look, cool effects there. It's like, no wait, what's like the structure, the political structure of society within these movies as well, because there's clearly it's not even, like we said, it's not even hidden in these movies. It's the plot. It's the text.
Right. It's not. It's these. God, these are so. The other thing that makes them so sort of 80s and early 90s too is just this sheer lack of subtlety.
I don't think you need it though in these. Like, I don't think that's a negative.
It's not a
to
negative.
these.
It really.
Right.
I don't think either of them would really work otherwise.
Right.
I think that it is like we're going to make this absurd, and we're going to make this all out or nothing.
And I would say it's refreshing. The structure of it, I think, is refreshing, because in They Live, it's the slow reveal of. Actually, let's look at this angle as we're wrapping up here. Partway through They Live, as we were watching it together, we were like, wait. What was the preview for this movie? How was this sold to people? Because in Society and in They Live, there's a hook that you don't want to spoil, because you want it to be. I think it's more powerful if it's revealed as you're watching the movie. We're like, oh wait, what? Especially with Society, with the way it builds up to that finale. Like, you don't put that weird blob orgy cult scene in the trailer. Also, you probably just can't put that in the trailer. But even with They Live, like, you don't want to spoil some of like the fun of discovering this story as you watch it.
Yeah.
And so I think both structures are really interesting, that you don't have a ton of, like, we joked watching They Live that like the fight scene needed to be as long as it was, because there just really wasn't any other action scenes going on. And this is a John Carpenter movie. This guy wants to get to some set pieces, but he also wants to build a story.
Right.
So you need to have some action in there along the way. The cassette tape in Society, you're like, wait, what the fuck are we listening to? What is going on here? There are little hooks, there's little breadcrumbs that are dropped to fulfill like your horror or your action beats, because that's the genre you're in, before you get to the end where you're like, boom, here you go. Here's what we all came for, right?
Right.
And you don't get that kind of structure in some modern stuff. Like, it's oftentimes I would say within that genre, people are too quick to like get to the gore without, like, no, you got it. Like, let's build this up a minute here. Come on.
Well, I think that it's part of what makes these so satisfying, right? That means you have to structure them perfectly.
You got to do the work.
You got to do the work. You've got to do the character work, right? You've got to paint these people thoroughly in the the heightened crazy ways. And then, when you do that Punch Out, right? That absurd fight, which is sort of just iconic fight. It's a weird thing, because like you're part of what's great about it is it's intentional, like pacing wise, it seems sort of like a disaster, or it would on paper, because it's like, But then, of course, it's completely intentional, right? He knows exactly what he's doing. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be that.
Right.
And I think, that makes it all the better because you've shown, and this is, I think, part of it is Carpenter. Both of these movies are like this. Carpenter, in his heyday, during his great streak, is perfect at structuring movies. Like he's, I think, a master of doing this, of just a perfectly structured and timed movie. Like it's why they feel so good to watch.
Right.
And so for him to just sort of say "fuck it" is really great.
Yeah. Well, I even mentioned that on a previous show, I think back during our art house horror run, where I was watching just like bottom of the barrel, like 80s horror stuff, because I wanted to kind of do a deep dive into just like the crap of the era as well. And then I went and watched The Fog.
Yeah.
And within just the first few moments of The Fog, you were like, oh, you could tell like he's building a world and there's like a craft to this. And like my brain was immediately just going like, oh, thank God, I'm back to something like this. Like there's a craft here.
Well, it's the sort of thing. I mean, I think The Fog is one of his pretty good movies, not one of his greats. And it's like watching I don't think The Fog is bad, but it's like watching a bad Spielberg, where like it's not a good movie, but it's still Spielberg, so everything's like done perfectly. Like the structure of the movie is perfect because you're just watching someone who understands cinema like intrinsically. I think in a lot of ways. And this is, not a director with as much of a history or as well known, and I actually haven't really seen any of their other work, honestly. But I think that part of what it is that society is just as well structured.
Yeah, because it's building, and it knows it's giving you just enough to keep you interested. Like we said when we were watching it, there's plenty. Most of it is just like most of my interest in that movie as we were watching was just like, what the fuck is going on? What the fuck are they hinting at?
Well, part of what I think it does is it really builds a sense of isolation, right? Of the slow realization of you being slowly detached from society as you realize what it is, and the sort of fear that the sort of panic, and it really sort of gets that, and that there's going to be a big explosion at the end, like you can sense it, like there has to be, there's going to be a reveal,
yeah,
and they build the tension for that like really, really well.
I kind of wonder with that one. I have not dove at all into Brian Yuzna's career outside of this particular movie, and knowing that he produced some of the Stuart Gordon stuff. But also as a writer, I was just checking real quick. As a writer, he's got 14 credits, director 18 credits, producer almost 30. But he didn't write Society. Comparing his directing credits to his writing credits, a lot of that does overlap, but not Society.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering maybe since this one's kind of risen to the top, of his filmography at this point in time, I wonder if maybe that has to do with someone else writing the story in the first place.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I want to say that until I watch the rest of his movies.
Yeah, that was more just like a thought out there. That's not a statement of fact, but
yeah. So can the 80s be redeemed?
No, but I like investigating it.
So this is one of the major divides on this show that is slowly built up over time, and I've grown a deep affection for the 80s as a decade and as a weird cauldron.
Yes, I'll give it that, and it's fun to explore. So I mean, I don't know if it's ever going to be fully redeemed for me, but it's a more interesting film decade to me than it was like a year ago, but that's also pretty much because I've been exclusively slowly kind of going through some of the horror highlights of the decade. So
right, well,
that's where I'm at.
You can find plenty of lows too,
and it might be potentially coming up on our next episode for me. So we'll see.
So should we talk about our next episode?
Yeah, there's a awkward transition for you.
Oh, for me? You want me to do it?
You want to do the stay tuned?
Yeah. I never do the stay tuned. This is so weird.
You always do, because then I go into the whole before we sign off thing.
Oh, that's true. To close out, we're going to talk about our next episode, which is coming up very soon. Because you know what next month is? You know what next month starts with? It starts with May Day. And May Day is International Workers' Day. May Day is the holiday for socialists and anarchists and communists and anti-capitalists of all kind to celebrate working class history and so forth. And last year, which was the first year of our podcast, we totally missed May Day. So this year, we're going to spend a whole month looking at movies about work. working basically about work, about the labor movement, but also about places without the labor movement as well. And so we're going to start off with our special May Day special, which we're going to do May Day through the whole month. But our special May Day special with two specially chosen films representing both of our, our deep tastes and views on the world. That's not totally true. It's sort of true. 1984's The Killing Floor and 1986's What Is It with the 80s? Man, we just talked about the 80s and like liking that not, and then they just come right back in 1986's Gung Ho.
Yeah, that was unintentional. Gung Ho has been one I've wanted to revisit for a while, so I was debating using that as a nostalgia pick at one point, but I am not a Ron Howard fan, but I am a Michael Keaton fan. And Gung Ho was one of those movies when we first got a VCR in the late 80s, early 90s. I was raised on two kinds of comedy thanks to my dad. One was Mel Brooks comedies, and the other was Michael Keaton comedies. We watched Gung Ho. We watched The Dream Team, Mr. Mom, even there a few times. Any of those Michael Keaton 80s comedies were in there, and I have not gone back to any of them in a while. I'll regularly go back to Mel Brooks for a laugh or just to reminisce about stuff I used to watch with my dad, but I have not gone back to Gung Ho in a while. And I know one of your pet topics, I guess, Isaac, is the whole Japan Panic, which we mentioned off and on throughout the show, but I think this is going to give us a chance to really dive into examine that.
I mean, I hope to do a future episode where we just look at the Japan Panic as a thing. But yeah, no, definitely, this is our first, not our first, but a major taste of it. The Killing Floor is an early film of Bill Duke's, and it was originally like basically a PBS like TV movie.
Yeah, it's the American Playhouse,
right?
That series they did, yeah.
And that creates certain limitations in terms of pure production, but it's a powerful movie about attempts to build interracial union organizing, or an interracial union in meatpacking plants in Chicago, or in slaughterhouses, Chicago during World War I, and it's directly based off of the journal of a black worker, and it's really amazing. And it premiered on Criterion Channel a couple weeks ago. I mean, basically, I don't think anybody could have watched it before then, right? It's a streaming premiere, and I've seen labor historians that I follow on Twitter going like, "This is the best American labor movie I've ever seen," and I think it really captures something important, and it's really real.
Right.
So I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
And we will, as a yin-yang kind of bounce to that, we'll go with a potentially pretty offensive Ron Howard comedy from the 80s starring Michael Keaton along with it.
Well, but in a sense, we have a theme of race and labor.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Right off the bat, but one where we may be going like, wow. Yeah, the one examines racism and probes how it divides the working class, and the other one may, it's a little too early to say because we have to watch it, may just kind of be racist. We'll find out.
So I think it's pretty telling just based on the taglines for the two films we're going to be taking a look at. So The Killing Floor, the tagline for that one is "A black man's search for the American dream turns into a bloody nightmare." Pretty accurate, sounds like, for that movie. Whereas Gung Ho is "When East meets West, the laughs shift into high gear."
Ooh, wow.
So it's going to be interesting to kind of smash those two films together and see what we come up with.
Yeah. That's going to be real interesting.
Yeah. But before we sign off, we do want to remind everyone listening to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you're using. And if you do enjoy the show, tell a friend or two. We're also up and running on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, the usual stuff. So follow the links in the show notes to give us a follow on the various social medias. And until next time, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. And, stay safe out there. Your ruling class may just be trying to absorb you in an orgy.
Okay, that's my new favorite one.